Shaun Taylor, welcome.
Thank you so much.
Uh, hey, Shaun, can you just give us some of your accolades? You're an author, you're a podcaster. No, I don't know everything about you. I know some things,
I
so
still
I
don't
want
know
to hear
everything
some
about
accolades.
myself. I'm still learning me. Is that a good accolade? Interestingly enough, so I do get uncomfortable when I start talking about myself in respect to accolades, and it's just that it's not part of my daily rhythm talking about me in that way. But, buddy, I just had to get in front of it yesterday. I put up a post on my Instagram, and it was that the and I've been working on it for a few days because it's not that I'm tired of answering the question of who I am. It's just that I always feel awkward when I explain who I am. And who are you and who I am is really quite complex and deep and rich. And it's hard to put into an elevator pitch of Instagram in 10 seconds. But I just had to go through that practical exercise because, I'm trying to be helpful on the internet. So I put up a post yesterday and the image just says, "Who is this guy?" And it's me standing in my backyard watering my tomatoes, and I just happen to be wearing a The Collective um, camouflage shirt that Chance Burles created, and some camo pants, and I've just come off of a bike ride. It's not that I'm trying to be a super trooper in my backyard. I shredded on the single track, watered my tomatoes, took a quick snap because that's generally how I operate on the daily. So I used a daily photo to say, "Who is this guy?" Swipe. And then you swipe it to the second one. And it's my accolades to some degree, or maybe not accolades per se, but it's a sort of the rhythm of the things that I've done in my life over the last 60 years. And some of those things kind of sound impressive, and I don't know, they read well, and it makes me feel like I've done a few things in my life, but it's trying to compress a life into a paragraph that will make a person pause for a moment and pay attention. But I don't want them to pause so much that it becomes impressive. And that's the hard part about writing or accolades or explaining myself. I want someone to pay attention. I want someone to respect my time. I want someone to hang out with me authentically in the moment, just like you are right now. But I want to be able to do it by flicking a switch. So the bam, they're in it with me, like with me, rather than, having to like slowly slide up a little light slider over the next day and a half as I explain myself so that we can finally get to this moment where we just accept the reality of things. And so accolades are difficult for me. And that's why I just wrote one up yesterday to help the interwebs.
Yeah, when I was going through my hiring process with trying to get hired by a firefighter, it's a very competitive process. And I remember going through interview after interview. I probably 70 interviews,
Whoa.
and I had done a mock interview with a captain one time, and he told me to stop saying I am or I did these things. He
Mm.
said to replace it with saying I've been fortunate enough to have these experiences, because it separates you from a group of people who have come up with accolades. And I remember I never forgot when he has said that, because it did come off much more with this like a sense of humility,
Mhm.
and like you have this sense of service with yourself, as opposed to I am this and I am that. And like I said, never forgot when he said that. I am fortunate enough to have this experience.
So the interesting thing about that is, and I agree, it takes off the edge. It rounds out the sharp edge of, oh, I don't want to actually like talk about who I actually am. Um, not the problem, maybe the issue with that is that you have been fortunate, but you have created the fortune. And so I've been fortunate to have a bunch of careers and a bunch of good friends and a bunch of experiences and et cetera, et cetera. I have been fortunate. I have. But I've also created that fortune. In fact, there's that old saying, fortune favors the brave. And so, was I brave? I don't know. I tried my best. I got after it. And so, like, does by saying I've been fortunate to hang out with some great people who've taught me some amazing things, does that then take away my agency? Like that luck? Because that's what it then gets read as. I've been fortunate enough too. In the mind, it gets stripped out too. He's been lucky to dot dot dot. But it's not luck and it's not fortune. Those are words that kind of represent really what we're talking about, but I don't think either of those words work. And so it's not that I'm disagreeing with you because I agree. I kind of have the same language in my own head. It's just that I think for each individual, they have to be careful on, cherry picking the word that works best for their mind. Is it fortune? Is it luck? Well, what is it? That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, another phrase he said to replace it with was, "I've had the opportunity to have this experience." So, like interchangeably using those as opposed to being, I did this or I did that.
Yeah.
You
I
know,
am the man.
I yeah,
I rule the world.
pretty
Yeah.
much.
Yeah. And it is a point of consideration that someone has to be careful with. And just this very conversation, by raising that subject, hopefully there's someone out there that will listen to this and think, whoa, you can be granular with your speech. Whoa, it can mean many things. Whoa, I better be careful when I'm casually throwing out a word. What do I mean in this moment with this word that I use in 10 different ways? That's food for thought for sure.
Yeah, and then yeah, using language and the way you just it changes the way someone perceives a sentence. And someone can take it one way, someone can take it a totally different way. And it's interesting how we start to create ideas and concepts just by what someone says. It's insane. I mean, you look
It
at the
is.
the world right now, it's just in destruction based off what people will say.
It honestly, and so, I used to be pretty casual with my speech, not casual in the sense of I was, not thoughtful. I mean, I've always been, I think, thoughtful, and I've always minded what I said. But what I didn't realize when I was younger is the richness of the language, the richness of intention. And so, you can say a paragraph to someone as you look them in the eye, and it can land flat as a pancake because you didn't put the proper intention behind it. When I was young, I used to just say, and I anticipated that the receiver would understand what I meant, but it doesn't work like that. I had to like say things and then like wrap them with an intention to some degree. Maybe it was invisible to the other person. Maybe it was partly visible. Maybe it was fully visible. Just didn't matter to me. I had to put intention behind my words. And that's a hard thing to explain. I know you understand, but it's a hard thing to explain in a simple couple of sentences. I had to learn how to talk to people in a way that wasn't just flat, and it also wasn't about tonality or intonation or rhythm or velocity. It wasn't any of these speech tricks or hacks or ways to put ideas into people's minds. It was I had to learn how to actually use intention with words, and that is a hard thing, as I said, to describe, but it is an important thing to start trying to do or practicing, because what it certainly did for me is tie my thoughts to my spirit, if you will. And without those two things aligned, really you're kind of almost operating in two states of existence. You're doing things, you're saying things, you're being things, but you're not like actually the thing in your spirit. And
Yes.
so I'm not saying that a person's wandering around out there as an empty vessel just talking if they've got no spirit. That's not what I'm saying, kind of. But you do have to have spirit in order to live that rich life, in order to make the impact, not just for the world around you, but within yourself. And so if you have a spirit and you aren't actively managing it, or expanding it, or contracting it, or using it in a way actively that you can see that you have spirit, that you can move the world around you with spirit. I don't know. It's You're missing a lot.
Yeah, I think embodiment is a spiritual practice in itself. People don't
Mhm.
realize that. And it takes a lot to embody something. You're becoming something and nothing at the same time, which is a paradox in itself, right?
It is. I love it.
So,
I do love it.
yeah. uh, I wanted to have this conversation with you, and this is something that had come up, and it's the topic of Wabi Sabi. Now, this is like the idea of perfectionism, and perfectionism is kind of like this. It's a sneaky subject because it creeps into our consciousness and the way we operate without us even understanding how it got there. So I have a long relationship with Wabi Sabi. I mean, the first time I came across this term was I was in Japan, and my first time in Japan, and I went to a tea ceremony. And right before I entered the room, there's this huge wall and showing Wabi Sabi. It just says Wabi Sabi and it had a long transcript on what Wabi Sabi is. And I read through it and I was like, man, this is so beautiful. And I just remember sitting there and recognizing how much I involve my perfectionism and how it robs me of my entirety. And when I went through the tea ceremony, it was just so simple and perfect at the same time, which is so strange. So going into the wabi sabi and understanding its idealism and its virtue and how we uh, require this need to want to make things perfect, and understanding the love of imperfection is like the basis of what wabi sabi is. And it's just a reminder for myself all the time. I even have it tattooed on my leg. I have this Japanese leg sleeve, and on the side there's a frog holding a flag, and in Japanese um, symbols it says wabi sabi. And it's just reminding myself that when I walk in life and I move in a room or move into a different career or whatever it is, that my idea of perfection is it's a limitation. And looking at the imperfection is like how I want to perceive my life. And it's really tough because when you're trying to do something, your intention is not going to actually have that embodiment, like of kind of what you're talking about. And it makes total sense when you're moving through this this life and this journey. And what came up recently was I was at work and I just was flipping through YouTube, and I saw after school that YouTube account. I subscribed to it, and so it came up with Wabi Sabi. I was like, oh cool, I'm gonna watch this. And as I was watching it, I was like, dude, for some reason I thought of Sean, and I thought of like sending this to him and then also doing an episode on it. So this is why we're here, and let's kind of go through the topic.
I love it. And so, by the way, thank you for sending me that video. And anyone who just kind of listened to what you were talking about and picked up that there was this video and you thought of me, I'm so glad you sent it because it's a great video. And it's not great just in the sense of the information that it puts across, it's great how it puts it across through the drawing, through the creative art of describing something creatively, and it's a beautiful thing to watch. And so it really struck me as a video in the way that it educates, and it educates in a bit of a different way. Maybe it's not for everyone, but it's for someone, and that's the beautiful part about Wabi Sabi, I think, is there's enough um, uniqueness in the world that there's uniqueness in the world for everyone. Something will catch your eye. And so that uniqueness for you and for me and for everyone on the planet, that to some degree is Wabi Sabi. And it is inherently I would like to call it a perhaps a unique quality that has coherence. So it's a ragged edge of something that to a person is sharp and ugly and brutal, perhaps, but to another person it is insightful and beautiful in its own way. And so, Wabi Sabi, I think, as an overarching theme, is an important discussion, but then it's not universal for every single person on how they interpret it. So here's the fun part. Now, I did do a bit of reading yesterday on the topic, and it blew my little peanut because there's something about Wabi Sabi that I was unaware of, and it requires, ironically, the pursuit of a deeper knowledge within Wabi Sabi itself. And what Wabi Sabi does is it inverts. And so,
Mm.
again, this is relatively new information to me, and I had to do like a lot of comparative sort of red teaming. I used some large language models to ensure that the history was correct, that the inversion of the principles behind Wabi Sabi did occur this way. And so here it is, the history of Wabi Sabi. And I might butcher it a little bit because I'm not reading off any script or what have you. Wabi Sabi as we know it now used to be the inverse of what we know it as. And so Wabi and Sabi are two different words, singular words, combined to make a meaning. So now what you think of Wabi and Sabi, we'll call them, sort of a peaceful aging and respect for the beauty of an individual piece or moment or human that is relevant to them and makes them unique and beautiful in its own way through aging and through patina and through time. So that's kind of, and there's many other words attached to what we think of as Wabi Sabi right now, but generally speaking, that'll get us there. The inverse is Wabi and Sabi. Used to mean Wabi was isolation, was living in a cold, dark hut as a hermit, was leaving society and as punishment. And Sabi was rust and decay and destruction and horror to some degree. Now, these words were what Wabi and Sabi used to mean. In essence, if you'd done wrong in your village, you got Wabi Sabi'd. You were straight out to the middle of Nowheresville, living in your cold hut. Everyone abandoned you, and you were kind of screwed. Okay, that's a casual language. You got Wabi Sabi'd, bro. Now, here's the fun part. That's what it used to mean. And then and there's a history to this, and I'm gonna say, and then this guy, because there's a pile of characters that sort of evolved the process. They inverted Wabi Sabi. And so the ruler of Japan at the time was fascinated with himself and fascinated with his ego. And so, and I'm using loose terms now just to paint the picture. And so he had become highly engaged with the perfection of things. The Chinese and then eventually the Japanese tea ceremony was perfect, with perfect porcelain, with perfect gold, with perfect everything. And the tea ceremony as a whole, and the ruler at the time as a whole, everything was straight lined, everything was plumb, everything was perfect or as close to it as possible. And so a movement started to create the inverse, and it happened in house. It happened with a mole. So the ruler of Japan at the time had a advisor, and he was a cultural advisor. And he was there to explain life as a whole, the beauty of life, and to some degree, how to live a simpler life, we'll call it. And so we've got a ruler who's fascinated with gaudy gold things in his White House, I mean, in his palace. And then we've got a character who's a mole within the palace. And He's trying to change someone's mind. So what he does is he brings in, as part of the official ceremony, and now this guy is the guy who sets the standard for tea ceremonies. He brings in the official standard as a simple clay bowl with a simple clay drinking vessel. He dumbs everything down. He unbeautifies it. He takes it down to the base elements, and he makes that the cultural standard for all of Japan. In essence, he flies in the face of the emperor. He takes a inverse position and slowly but surely convinces everyone that this is the way, and everyone adopts it over a period of time. And then they start railing against the perfectionism of only gold tea bowls. And so there is this cultural phenomenon that inverts itself. And how is it done? Because that's also fascinating. So not only is the standard set by the ceremony, it is also set through some physical things, such as the standard is then set that in order to go into a tea house, you have to go through a tiny little hole. You have to crawl through a hole. And to crawl through it, you've got to take your sword off because it's so tight. You've got to take off all of your gaudy nonsense. And you've got to kind of strip yourself down to your bare elements to crawl through, again, an official dimension, hole at official height. You can only crawl through it, kind of stripped down. And then once you get inside the tea house, it's all plain. There's like a couple of mats and that's it. And then you're drinking out of the standard issue simple bowl. So it went from hyper gaudy, like, I mean, do we have anything going on like that right now in our world? This hyper gaudy sort of ruling, this rulership, this individual who is fascinated with things that are not good in life, and it gets inverted into the complete opposite. And now there's a reckoning in Japan because the guy who showed up and loves his gold started to realize that he wasn't in charge anymore. And so this kind of cultural revolution ended up biting someone in the ass. And it was the guy who slowly Jedi mind tricked Wabi Sabi. Eventually, the emperor realizes that things have changed and not in a way that he likes. So he sends his tea master, his cultural advisor, the guy who kind of shaped Japan in this sense, sends him out into his own little, he got wabi-sabied out into a spot that he was kind of all by himself. And then eventually the emperor told him to commit seppuku, or to the sword in the stomach, and to kill himself honorably as a sacrifice to recognize that he'd wabi-sabied everyone. And so it's a fascinating history when you consider at its broadest sense. At one point, wabi-sabi meant a 180-degree opposite of what we think it is now. And only through a calculated, slow, individually driven process by one man did he invert not only the term, he inverted a country. How about that?
Yeah, most of the I think, was he a monk? A monk mole, I want to say he probably was, like, even like subscribing to some Zen Buddhism, I'm assuming, because he's looking at a culture that's ridding the true beauty of something and
Mhm.
bastardizing it. And then he's seeing it and he's like, how am I going to trick the psychology of this? And I think the totality of it is finding the imperfection, the beauty in the imperfections, or finding the beauty in imperfections, and then glorifying our imperfections and making sure we're not creating realities outside of what's there right in front of us. And I think that's what we're dealing with right now with our psychology, with our society, with AI, with social media. It's all built on comparison. And I think it's been a very slippery slope on how it's infiltrated the psychology of our youth, the psychology of a business model, the psychology of how we perform, because it's based on a lot of masks and there's less authenticity with that. And I think the way we see the future now, as AI infiltrates the internet, we're going to see a lot of AI slop. And now it's going to get so disgustingly perfect that we're going to kind of, most people, in my opinion, will lean towards the other way. Or you'll have the other side. I think it'd be like a 50-50 chance where the other side's just going to be more attracted to that. And I think this has a lot of how it's infiltrated the self worth of an individual built on comparison, because the perfectionism model is essentially made, we're making a bargain with ourselves.
Hmm.
Like, if I do enough, then I can be worthy. And you see it with so many different individuals who have been, really worshipped and seen and put on to a pedestal. A good, I would say a good, trying to think of a good example. David Goggins is a perfect example, especially for men and especially for individuals in my line of work. We worship this guy because he has created a warrior archetype that is like push harder, more pain, and you'll have what you need and what you want. And I remember my first interaction seeing David Goggins, I thought the opposite. I thought this guy was a psychopath. Like, you know what I mean? I just was like, this guy is just insane. He's full of rage, full of anger. And personally, I thought he was completely insecure. And, I just, other people idolize him. And what I've noticed is in Greek mythology, there's an archetype called the ascetic warrior, which means
Hmm.
more pain, more growth. But that is like it's more of a limitation because it only goes so far. And so that ascetic warrior asks more of you to prove your self-worth. And inside Greek mythology, there was what was seen as an archetype as the mature warrior, and that is one who doesn't require someone to prove one's worth. And it's all about its relationship to things and how it manifests its own worth, not through proving oneself, not through having more, but having a connectivity to things. And without being identifying with an image, or it shows up to its family a certain way and it doesn't need to prove that. It shows up to work a certain way. It doesn't need to prove that. It's not attached to identity. And that's what I've learned through just those two archetypes. And what I've found is that through the limitation of trying to prove yourself, it's exhausting, it's expensive. And when your neurology adapts to that, now you've snuck in something much deeper, which has something to do with your worthiness that's getting involved with this. And when you make these bargains with yourself, these agreements, now you're working around hidden belief systems. Now you're working around an addiction, which I think the hidden addiction with this is like an addiction to certainty, because pain is predictable. And when you do your workouts, you're like, okay, I'm going to push harder. I'm going to work through this because you know that it's predictable and you're going to get an outcome. But that's so linear as far as we are talking about like self growth, and you're looking towards this perfect aesthetic with your body. And I think this is really infected also the body dysmorphia kind of going on.
Hmm.
Like all the Botox, all the facelifts, all of the tummy tucks. I'm like, you didn't work to get those things. It's not true beauty. And we all see that, especially, and this kind of is more my neck of the woods in LA. You see a lot of that. And I lean in more towards something that's organic. And I think this whole topic of conversation is so beautiful because it opens up so many portals, and we now can see like these little tabs now under how this has affected our society.
It has infected our society, and the only way a person can understand that is if they, to some degree, metric it, or they create a construct to understand the 0 to 10 scale of how much we've been impacted by it. And so, culturally, as you stated, regionally, you'll see it more where you're at than you would like in the middle of Idaho, as an example, or wherever. Now, let's compare and contrast where you're at versus where I was just at, and that was in Korea for a month. That's next level. That is whatever you've got going on right now where you're at, and I'm familiar with it, times 10. I've never been anywhere on the planet that is quite like Korea or South Korea in respect to this, not even an obsession. It's not an obsession because obsession is almost a healthy word compared to what I see in Korea respect to this. It is not good what's going on over there in respect to Wabi Sabi. There is a very much concerted effort to shortcut the process, as you just described. The beauty of life is finding something that you appreciate after many, many years through a hard process of cracks and breaks and re-gluing it back together again. That to some degree, the vessel of your life is best arrived and appreciated many years later, looking at kind of something that is unique to you, your cup that you drink with. No one else has a cup quite like you because it's got the fine cracks and the fine glue repair marks in it. But in Korea, the shortcut is that you'll get immediately to the front of the line through surgery and artificiality. And so you can see it very much in the preening of everyone. Well, I say everyone, maybe 80% of the population on a subway, on in a store, on a sidewalk. It is not only best foot forward; it is best artificial foot forward. And so it is the 1,000 photos of like I'm going to take every single angle and I'm going to take every single little lip pursing motion. You'll see someone rattle off 1,000 photos in that moment, every single pose imagined and then some. And then it will be contrived, artificially twisted into. I've sat next to people and watched them do it, increase their face and shrink their face, do this, do that, all of the things. And so the person becomes an avatar that they don't even know. They create an artificial version of themselves that is to some degree almost empty because their focus is on becoming something that they're not. And in so doing, they never get to learn who they are. And so the big push over there is artificial beauty rather than authentic living, at least on the digital world for sure. But in the 3D world, in the organic world, when you're on that subway platform, it's playing out in real world as well.
Yeah, I like how it's raising the bar, like or extending the finish line that you'll never get to. That's really what perfectionism starts to
Mhm.
indulge in. And it's not meeting reality, which is a problem. And that's really where I think the sickness is, because when we start reaching and trying to attain something you're never going to meet, you're always going to be unsatisfied. So in that dissatisfaction comes dis-ease, which is where illness starts to arrive, or where autoimmune diseases start to arrive, because you've been ignoring and neglecting versions of yourself that are dormant, or versions of yourself that are just latchkey kids, and they're not met with sanctity. They're not met with value. And so inside of your architecture, your original architecture, there seems to be that's where the disease starts to evolve, because you're dissatisfied at a psychological level, and at a psychological level your psyche reflects your biology, and your biology reflects your psychology. So it's like these things are, they're they're fluid, and they interact with each other, they're synergistic. And so I think the world we create with our minds that is not matching what we trying to attain is there's a lot of grief involved with that. There's a lot of torment involved with that and a lot of suffering. And I liked inside that video, it mentioned through the three elements of Buddhism and it was suffering, it was impermanence, and it was emptiness. And I loved the way just those three elements were kind of involved with the conversation of Wabi Sabi because they're they're so simple, but they're so complex at the same time. And I had to do my own research just on those 3 topics. And I like to do, I use ChatGPT, and I heard you guys talk in that one conversation around AI and how Chance uses AI and certain things like that. And I think you guys called it redlining or something like that.
Red teaming.
Red teaming. Yeah, I love that concept. That was awesome, dude.
Yeah.
But I love using ChatGPT to find the history and lore of something. Like that's where my rabbit holes are. And so finding the history and lore around the impermanence, I was stuck on that for days, dude. So it was
That's
kind of like
great. That's
cool
great.
research to understand just impermanence in how human beings, the human species is relatable to that. Because most of the time we are not in relation to impermanence. And there in Tibet, there's a practice where you have it's a surrounding circle of monks and they have these little horns and they have these small colors. Have you ever seen that practice? They make
Yeah.
these beautiful mandalas. And then once the children come up who are being raised in the monastery, when the monastery or the whole mandala is complete, it takes maybe a month to complete this thing. And it's done with precision and patience and like
And love.
backbreaking and love. And when you look at this thing, you're like, oh my God, it's super beautiful. But these children, they're told to wipe it all away at the very end. And so the purpose of that is to teach these children impermanence, that nothing is ever certain, and to learn how beautiful things can just go away and vanish. And it's your opportunity to have a relationship to what impermanence is and apply it to your life. Now, when I had seen this years ago, I put two and two together with the impermanence with that concept. And it was just like, it is so true because we attach ourselves to the beauty of things that are essentially not eternal, and we have to have a relationship to things we attach to and understand like we've now attached to it, now we've created an identity with it, and that's the part where it starts to sneak in, and that's where the ego starts to get involved in all these things. And the thing about the ego when it gets involved with these attachments and these beliefs is that it's very sneaky. And when you start to learn how sneaky it can be, and you start to see how it's manifested itself in your life, perfectionism is a great one because it starts to wearing different masks. Because you become more spiritual. You're like, okay, I created an identity about becoming more spiritual or becoming more and more and more. It goes back to that aesthetic warrior because you're needing more to prove your worth.
I got a question for you.
Yes.
It seems that you've been considering impermanence for some time. And sounds like you've gone through several phases of considering it because you started, several years ago, and then just recently you've been hopping down the rabbit hole of impermanence and maybe learning some more details, etc., about it. But let me ask you this question: when you very first started thinking about impermanence, maybe 10 years ago or 8 years ago, whatever, first time you started thinking about impermanence versus now or versus yesterday, is it fair to say that though the relationship between those two moments is different now with the single word impermanence? Do you look at it differently?
Yeah. Well, I think there's evolution that takes place once I start building information around a certain subject. So I've built information around how what I create. And what I create is a lot around false foundations.
Hmm.
So my work has been to build foundations that are good to with fertile soil. Now, most of that is uh, a painful process, I would say the least, because as you start to kind of see how operating systems are working and you replace them with new operating systems, there's some type of civil war that starts taking place. Now, the way I can kind of describe it is, normally a person will try to let's say improve oneself. Okay, so let's say someone tries to do, and I'm using myself as an example. I used to try to improve myself through exercise. So as I would start to improve myself through exercise, it was all about competitiveness because being a firefighter is competitive. Now, as I got the job, it was the competitiveness was now I'm matched with, D1 athletes, ex-professional athletes. So now I'm trying to compare myself even more. But it was all around self-worth. And so over time, now that ability to improve myself has lost its validity in an act of self-love. So I've created an identity around something, I've created a behavior around something, I created something that was empty, had no value, true value. Now that part of me that wanted to continue to create that behavior, I had to kind of sit down with that part of myself and say, "Hey, you don't have to protect yourself any longer. You don't have to prove yourself any longer. I'm not denying you. However, I'm going to sit next to you, and this is the new operating system. We're going to operate with an act of love matter as a matter of me valuing every single part of myself, and that's where integration is kind of like what takes place. Now, as far as like impermanence it goes, that's where like my attachment is to. So it's more so deleting the attachments to things I have held in value, if that makes sense. And I think that's where impermanence starts to take place. You start to kind of see where your attachments are belonging to because it's never going to be there forever.
It's interesting that it correct me if I'm wrong, but when you were younger, was your relationship with impermanence more negative than it is now? And negative is a wrong term, but thoughts.
I think there's a bit of ignorance through
Ah, that's a
cultural,
great word. Ignorance.
being
Yeah, right.
being conditioned through culture, being conditioned through society, being conditioned through my parents, their belief systems, their values, their standards, and through children, other children I grew up around. And so I think the ignorance around impermanence became around taking things for granted, I think, and not cherishing certain things.
Hmm. So, if you were going to explain impermanence to your younger self now, how would you do it?
I'd say nothing's permanent. So don't,
Yes. Yeah. Keep it simple, stupid.
yeah, nothing's permanent. So don't put so much energy and affection into something that's gonna be there. I mean, expectations are the root of all heartache, and I think that's
Mm.
what part of the pattern of behavior is a fixed expectation on something.
Yeah, I suppose, the fleetingness of permanence is something that everyone has to get right with because nothing is permanent, of course. Everything is fleeting. But how long you cling on to that moment that's already gone is often where the trap lies for a lot of people, I suppose.
Yeah, it's confusing too, to explain this to a child. Like how do you explain permanence? It's why you got to keep it simple when you're explaining that to your children. Like that's why being a parent is challenging because you're looking to how can I let this child start to manifest a good lesson in their life. And I watch my little daughter, like she gets frustrated with certain things. And so I try to teach her to just do things little by little and to master the small little things first. And
Mm.
this kind of came with building Legos. Like she would get frustrated by reading this whole thing and she can't do it. I was like, hey, focus on one little thing first. And if you can do that with your best ability, that's all that matters. And then now she's building all these Legos all the time. And then now she's mastering this because she was able to just focus on one little task and be good at it. And now she's good at building the entire building, whatever it is, castles, whatever she has.
Just was it yesterday, I believe, maybe the day before, but on my Instagram account, I put up a photo of me when I was a young Pathfinder, all large and in charge in a camo outfit. And I put three lessons that I learned as a young Pathfinder. And one of the lessons was precisely what you just said. And it is the need, not an ability, but the requirement to be able to take something that is really, really big, like a multi-phase mission, or something that is really, really big, a massive physical requirement that is going to take so much effort that it just can't be done right now. And so the lesson that I passed along as one of these three lessons is you have to be able to forget about the complexity and the massive amount of work that it's going to take, and just focus on the thing right in front of your nose, the thing that you can do right now, the executional action now, the next minute of now. And so what you taught your daughter is what I just tried to explain to the internet, but through the lens of a young pathfinder that is at the time was pretty experienced in what he was doing, and so the lesson to some degree is pretty legit. But your lesson to your daughter is just as legit, given that your life has been wabi sabied enough that your wisdom has tangibility, has heft, has a meaningful weight to it, rather than a academic razor thin piece of paper that explains life to her through a sterile message. Your message is not a super thin, sterile message. It is a wabi sabi life that you're passing along to her. And so, my three little lessons that I passed along as a young Pathfinder to the interwebs was precisely what you just passed along to your daughter. And equally as experienced, I would say, equally as wabi sabied.
Yeah, there's a I just went to a concert on Friday, and it's one of my favorite bands, Revolution.
Mm,
And I don't know if you've ever heard that band. You have to
I
listen to them.
haven't.
It's a reggae band, and one of
Right
the
on.
songs is called "Courage to Grow." And there's one of my favorite parts of that song is, "Well, you can gain the world for the price of your soul." And so,
Mm,
like, part of that song is about traveling the going through the path less traveled will lead you to a destination that you had no idea. And that's really where growth comes from. And I always tell people that this great question around, this, I love telling this to people who are designing their life off platforms based on religion. Because I've subscribed to so many different types of religions and concepts, and I've studied so much of it that I came to a conclusion myself. And it's like, you can take the gravelly road, you can take the straight road, you can take the highway, you can take the underpass, you can take the path through the forest, but they all lead to the same destination. So it's up to you with the power of choice. And most of us have really not really understood the power of choice and how important it is in our path of life. And I think as a path finder and a truth seeker and all these things I've attached myself to, I've realized like the archetype of the fool has been so I've been so drawn to it because the fool has like this knapsack and he's just walking, aimlessly through life and falls forward into circumstances. And it's like this beautiful journey that we fail to just witness and love. And I think that's we try to if you try to perfect it and try to make every single small crevice a straight line, it's just not going to happen. And actually, yeah, if that's your aim, then you're going to come across much more hardships in your life because you're drawing that now to you. You're drawing the opposite of what your intention is. And that's just the way the universe operates. It's looking at the core architecture or the core blueprint of what's really getting really involved, what your true intentions are. And it's going to give you that.
So interesting that you frame it up as such, because it is generally speaking true. And if we were to use the paths as the tale of a person's life. You laid a few out, the pebbly one, the gravelly one, the dirt one, the weedy one, the all the different paths that a person can walk. First thing to establish is no matter what the path is, you got to freaking walk it because you can see all the paths in front of your nose and not walk down any of them. So that's the first thing. You got to walk the path, a path. Now, the interesting thing is, I feel, in as how you framed it up is, and you've done this either knowingly or unknowingly, and I think a lot of people do, knowingly or unknowingly, to various degrees. What you have been doing, what I have been doing, what any walker does, is eventually you'll walk long enough that you'll end up on a different path. Your gravel path will lead to a road, which will then lead to a dirt road that will then lead to a mountain that will then lead to a patch of weeds, and you will walk long enough that you will walk a number of roads, a number of paths, different kinds. And so it's along those many roads that a person walks, the many styles of paths that they will experience, that eventually they may determine what works best for them, but only after walking many paths. And so I think we're all walking to some degree, just some like walk with curiosity, and some will only do a step a year. So, you know, paths and direction and velocity, all of these things kind of converge into the end result, which is, you're 70 or 80 or 90 years old, however old a person gets till they see, what was it all about? What did I just do? What was this path that I was on? And it's hard to explain paths to yourself when you're 20. It's easier to explain paths to yourself when you're 60. At least I find it easier anyway. And so I love your example, the analogy, the metaphor of the various paths of life. But it does take the additional variables of intent and timeline to some degree in order to, flesh that one out a bit.
Yeah, and it can be confusing when you're younger.
Yes, indeed.
I think that's most of what our younger years are based on. It's based on a lot of confusion, and we that's why I think it's good to set standards for yourself as you get older, because your standards change and your
Mhm.
values can change. So, but if you write them down on a piece of paper, you can really like have more of an understanding of where your true intentions are. And I write standards all the time. Like I write them like, what are my standards in my career? What are my standards in my home?
It's
And
good
when you're working
practice.
with individuals, you can actually combine your standards and see what true value someone has in something. And you can kind of agree on what standards you both want to attain, and especially in a marriage, really helpful. And I think like that's it takes a lot of honesty, takes a lot of like open openness, and you can have a good conversation around it. It's a good healthy skill, and I think I wish I taught myself that when I was a little younger. But I did write down like 6 qualities of how to attain what I wanted to attain,
Mm.
and I'm trying to remember the top of my head. One of them was uh, be determined in advance and be thirsty to learn every day, be hungry to
Nice.
seek higher ground. And so I remember those 3, I always would just focus on those things because they really helped me become who I am today. And I still use those because it helps me, it gives me a sense of humility when I'm always looking to learn something new instead of thinking I'm the master of everything. And I think that's where true mastery is. You become the student and the teacher, and you see every person, everything as a teacher, and you start to use that quality in your life. And I think that helps. Even the idea of nature being the best teacher is where the idea of Wabi Sabi starts to land a little bit harder on your life, or a little bit with more essence in your life, because Like a tree grows and it's not going to lean 50% this way, 50% that way. It's going to lean where the wind tells it to. Now, the root of the tree is actually where the true essence and the true anchor points of where the value lies. Now, a tree with rotten roots is going to fall over wherever the wind blows. So, looking at our own architecture, pay attention to your roots. And that's where I think a lot of neglect comes from, is not going into your roots, not going into the depths of yourself because it's uncomfortable, because it's painful. You got to face emotions, you got to face memories. But once you start using that, and that's where the true growth comes from. And I think when you use that concept, you start to be more malleable around the forces of nature when the storms come. And there's a famous like a rap analogy, and it's 10 toes down, where
Mhm.
you stay grounded in where you are, where you came from, and you don't forget who you are once you have the fame. So like when it's if you ever listen to rap music, anyone else who's listening, that's where it comes from. It's
Mm.
remember your roots, remember where you were born, in like in the ghetto. And that's where like you learned everything of who you are. And so don't forget it, because it's important.
I, as you were rounding that out, I was just a touch distracted, not by what you were saying, because everything that you said was compelling and correct, by the way, in my opinion. But like right over here, can you see that little tiger right there? There's a little tiger. I'm going to show you that in a sec. It caught my eye because when I look at you talk, I have to kind of look almost directly at the tiger to some degree. So let me show you that. This will be interesting. It just came to mind. The cork board. So let me show you this. There you go. That'll give you a little bit of a close up now. As you can see, hopefully. Oh, isn't that an interesting little angle? You can see yourself in the reflection of, anyway. So as you
Oh
can
yeah.
see, all of that is made out of eggshell.
Oh really?
And how it's done is, I bought this in Vietnam on the way to the Cu Chi tunnels uh, down south, and all of these little factors in here are eggshell, tiny, 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 tiny little pieces of eggshell, and each little piece of eggshell has been put over a little fire in order to change colors of the eggshell, all the way from white all the way to dark through heat. And so not only are the colors different of the eggshell, but the size and shape of the eggshell is unique. Every single fractured little piece of eggshell is unique to its own little fracture. So then all of those things are created and put into a pattern. A whole pile of tiny little eggshells by one human. It is a charitable foundation that is a collective of individuals who've been heavily impacted by Agent Orange. And so, they may be missing an arm, they may be missing a leg, they may have all of these various birth defects, they may have, etc. But they have been impacted in their life by Agent Orange. And so, uh, their entire existence when we were there was to create these kind of things, sell them, and then pay for their food and rent and etc. And so, that in essence is their job, we'll call it. And so their job is taking tiny little eggshell fragments and creating a work of art. But here's what I just considered. That tiger doesn't actually exist as a tiger per se. It's just like one gajillion tiny little pieces of eggshell fragments. And so it is now in a shape of a tiger. The tiniest little eggshell now represents a tiger. And the tiger represents like power and ferocity and presence, all from a tiny, tiny little eggshell. And so that is really a example of a cohesive pattern made out of fragments to represent a thing, a tiger, just as you are, just as I am. We are like a pile of fragments drawn from our life, shaped into a pattern in our mind or in how we live, and we represent it as such on the daily. When I watch you in the podcast, you have not an unsettling calmness about you, but you're settled, more settled than most people are. And so that can throw people off because I know I've been told myself when I am locked in, paying attention, I'm in my zone. I have a little bit of an unsettling look about me because I throw out a look that isn't a look in my mind. It's just me. But what it is I'm settled, I'm calm, and I'm not giving anyone a read on me because I'm just simply there with them, looking at them, being with them, rather than sending them messages per se, or trying to be validated, or trying to smile inauthentically in order to gain something from the other person. I feel settled. And so I don't, unless I, unless there's a reason for me to start manipulating the moment through false signals, typically I just hang out and be me. And that can be unsettling. And so it's because my pattern over my life, all the tiny little eggshells that I've shaped into what we're doing right now, that is me okay with my pattern of life that, could just as easily be that to some degree. And so it's an interesting thought. What do you think?
Well, I like how you articulate the word fragments and even fractures. These are most people deem the fragments and the fractures of us ugly and horrible or whatever. And you're talking about something that was deemed horrible, right, by society with during the Vietnam War and the desecration of so many human beings who have to live deformed and in a state of suffering. However, the person who is creating this tiger with all these little fractures and fragmentations is creating something beautiful, which I find to be that's what Wabi Sabi is.
It's pretty
You're
deep,
taking,
right?
yeah, you're taking something that's horrible and you're making it to something beautiful. And I think that's the beauty of it. And that's the whole purpose of it. That's the whole purpose of life. I think that's one of the laws of life we fail to witness its own totality is and even thinking about war. Like why did Agent Orange even come into the conversation during that time? It's because that country thought it's what was best. You can even bring that into the conversation with Hitler, one of the most demonized depictions in our own recent human history. However, that's what he thought what was best for his people. Now, it's really in the eye of the beholder and how you're going to depict that. But when you're looking at Hitler, I mean, he only killed like a certain amount of people at that time. But you look at all these other places, like in Russia, Stalin killed like 10 times more than that. And in China, they killed like twice as much as that. But you don't really hear that as much. So why is this other person being demonized more than anyone else? These are kind of important questions I've always asked. But I think what the the point of your message is to really have some patience. You don't know the whole picture yet. You don't know the whole timeline yet. You don't know what's about to unfold yet. What we do have to accept is the reality and everything and our relationship to it.
Yeah, and the idea being that if you are the artist of your own eggshell life, you are striving to create a beautiful piece of art, but not striving in a way that you are disappointed with your art constantly. Just be a student of life, and the art will shape itself up. It'll become what it's supposed to become with enough effort and love and attention and time. You'll become what you're supposed to be if you do it right. And isn't that the trick now? What is right and what is wrong? And so, to use your example of Hitler, um, it sounds bizarre, but maybe the dude was like maximum effort doing his best, whatever was going on in his bonkers little mind. And so the guy next to him may not have been seeing eye to eye. And so what was going on with that guy? Now we've got two different patterns, two different eggshell worlds. And so this guy's doing his thing, this guy's doing his thing, but this guy's really doing his thing and this guy's not. All of a sudden, now he's doing all of the things for this guy. And that's how life goes. Two eggshells, one deferring to the other. Then all of a sudden, one eggshell is ruining the world. And so we all have our little patterns, we all have our existence, but it's not a solo journey. It is not a solo piece of art. Now there's a bunch of tigers walking around as patterns. And so they've got to learn how to get along. And if they can't interact as patterns, that's where things start going sideways, of course. That's where the two dudes standing next to each other allowed each other to see eye to eye and then start killing millions. And so patterns of eggshells standing next to each other, either nodding or not to the fate of the world, you know?
Yeah, they're also on a lot of meth. So there's that.
There's
Okay, so
that.
I
Yeah.
did want to ask you, as a conditioning coach, right? That concept of the ascetic warrior, or like even the archetype of David Goggins, how does that play into your role as a coach for you're conditioning someone who's a mountain bike rider? Because there's still a necessity for parts of that archetype if you're
Mhm.
going to be in a competitive race, right?
It's a great question. And so you raised this earlier, and I wanted to jump on it because you did it so well. But just a couple of things that I want to clean up from my end, and that is in respect to Goggins, like I appreciate what he's done, and I respect some of the things that he's done. I just don't respect it all, and I don't appreciate it all. He's not really my kind of guy, though he is for everyone else or a bunch of other dudes, I guess. But he's just not really for me. Now, it's not that I dislike him. That's not what I'm saying. It's just that he's not my guy. And maybe there's a reason for that. And so I'll just throw it out there, not to challenge anyone, just to maybe make someone out there a little uncomfortable and start thinking a bit more deeply. Maybe the reason he's not my guy per se is because I understand that kind of guy. To some degree, I kind of was at one point. My careers in my life and my as a younger man was pretty hard, as hard or harder than Goggins, I would say. And that's not to like say I'm here and he's there. I'm not making those comparisons. I'm just saying that I very much understand his path, and I've kind of been in it, and I've kind of been surrounded by it enough so that I have pretty good context on it. And I know that there's parts of it that are appealing to me. I'm not blind to it. And that is the problem with that path, is it can blind you to the nuance of life. Such a singular focus of I'm just going to be the hardest thing in the world will make you hard, and it will harden you up to a degree where you will miss parts of life. And so the balance is the trick, of course. So I don't necessarily subscribe to his message per se. And quite frankly, as I've said on other podcasts, I kind of get a bit bummed out that he just takes it to that next level of chirping where he's just got to yell and swear and like get all up in someone's grill like he's the man. And I get it. When I was young, I used to kind of be that way to some degree, but it doesn't make you friends. And more importantly, it doesn't encourage others to pick up what you're putting down. in a way that's healthy. And so I think that's kind of what it's all about for me when I look at a guy like Goggins is he's done some great things. He's really helped a lot of people. He's helped friends of mine, but he's not helping as many as he could if he just like edged off the rough edges or just like didn't swear as much or just wasn't all like aggressive all up in people's grills. But then that's who he is. And or that's who he chooses to be. I just wish he'd dial it back a little bit. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, because I'm relating because I used to be the same way. And I mean, I would just go through a state of extremism
Hmm.
where I needed more and more and more. More running because I used to run marathons. I used to have to run every day. So it's like, I need to push myself harder. I need to push myself with this. I need to push myself here until I hit a wall. And I think that's where the humility came from is when I hit a wall. And that's where injury came through. And working through
Hmm.
injury, you can't push harder because that's not how it works. And
But would you
so,
say but would you say that it works like this, that you to some degree have to like run into a wall to learn these lessons?
well, absolutely.
Hmm.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's, I think I had to understand suffering at its
I think
extent.
everyone does.
Pain, and pain was pain is still is a great teacher, and it just continues to teach me. And so I think with the archetype of David Goggins, he's great. I mean, he pushes. If you're beginning to become a Navy SEAL, you got to have the caliber of his mindset, or you will not make it. And
Hmm.
that's just the dead honest truth.
You got to have some
Because
bark in you.
yeah, but it kind of goes back to that addiction around pain. Like pain is predictable, so there's still uncertainty around that, and we have a problem being uncertain with certain things. And so that's where we want to start to just modulate and create these bubbles within ourselves that are predictable. So I like to bring up this conversation with you, and it's around moderation versus extreme.
Hmm.
So, because people, you have the other side, and the moderation is like, okay, that's just enough for me because I don't want to get too uncomfortable. And going into extreme is like, I want to push myself further into uncomfortability until I've gained some type of resilience around it. And so here's the thing, I think those two things are twins wearing different outfits.
Hmm.
What do you think about that?
Well, I think that, as I was listening, I do generally agree with what you're saying. And in my mind, how I frame it up is this bandwidth. And so, as a young buck or as a young fella, I had to develop bandwidth. I had to understand, like you, I had to push the pace and had to run into a few walls. And I had to suffer and accept pain and do the things to create bandwidth within myself, the ability to not be so narrow that anytime I ran into trouble or couldn't manage the moment, I was ping ponging, bing, 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 off my two extreme edges, we'll call it. So over a period of time, over a period of circumstances, I started to expand my bandwidth so that in the moment, the pings were not quite as frequent, and they kind of lose steam. When you get sort of a larger space as it pings and pongs, it's not like it's doing it in a vacuum. So as it bounces off one edge, it starts to lose steam as it moves through that middle ground to hit the other wall. I know it's a strange concept for anyone who's listening out there, but the idea being that in my mind, I don't think of bandwidth as digital. I think of it as analog. And because it's analog, it decays. Digital does not decay in that sense. So if I have a immensely big bandwidth, but I'm thinking as a digital space, it doesn't matter how big the space is. Digitally, it moves at the speed of light and there's no decay. But if I create a bandwidth and think of it as an organic bandwidth, then there is drop off in velocity, there is decay. And so the bigger my organic bandwidth, the less ferocity I have to deal with in the middle of the moment. And so in essence, I suppose another way of saying is become super more capable so that the tiny little things don't bug you in the middle space. So more bandwidth is good. When I was young, I didn't have enough bandwidth. Now I've just done enough. Like I've pushed my edges out through extremism, we'll call it, to understand what my left and right of arcs are, that my bandwidth is pretty freaking massive, man. And whatever happens in my day nowadays, it doesn't nearly freak me out as much as when I was a young buck because I've got like, and I don't want to call it so many more tools. What I have is just so much more bandwidth.
Yeah, so I think how you're relating to the moderation versus extremism is you've created a bandwidth that has been more responsive to whatever comes towards you, because in that bandwidth is your nervous system or your neurology, and which is everything. And
Mhm.
I think that's correlating to how even nature is interacting, right? Nature pulses, and it's expanding and contracting all the
There's a
time.
rhythm. Yeah.
So I think that is where the answer lies. It's not in between moderation and extremism, it's adaptability, it's responsiveness. So increasing your bandwidth is increasing your capacity or even your capacity to serve. Sounds familiar?
It sure
And that
does.
so I think it's not about having an aim to be perfect. It's about becoming whole. And when you become whole, you're integrating the totality of everything, totality of life, totality of bandwidth in response. And that's I think where real resilience resides is whatever life throws at you and your response to it is true resilience. It's not creating, so much discipline to the point where you're so rigid, because rigidity is where our problems lie. There's an ancient proverb and it says the straight tree will turn into wood and the crooked tree will not.
Hmm. Interesting. I haven't heard that one. That's good.
Because a living tree will bend and a dead tree is perfectly rigid. So I think that's like the basis of that. It's like if your nervous system can only function in comfort, it's rigid. If your nervous system can only function in intensity, it's rigid. It's also rigid. But when you are having this malleable neurology, and then neurology is including your thoughts. And that bandwidth is having the capability of taking in whatever life throws at you, whatever conversation, whatever conflict, whatever uh, you know praise you get. That's our ability to adapt and overcome whatever it is, good or bad.
So let me throw this at you. Now, I am really genuinely curious about your feedback on, or not your response, but your idea once I throw it at you. So, rounding it out, let's pretend for the moment is what we're talking about. And you now have the ability to deploy that anywhere you want at any given time. Later this afternoon, you're going to have your maximum bandwidth and you're going to be in the moment. What I have found is this, that the moment someone understands that life can work that way, they will start thinking of this ability as a thing to use at this time and at that time,
Mm.
rather than how I think of it is there is no time. Or let's flip that script and call it what we're doing right now is existing on a time space continuum together in synchronicity, sharing a moment. So that's what we're doing right now. So 5 minutes from now, should I do my best effort of applying maximum bandwidth, or should I be doing it all the time? And that's a rhetorical question, of course, because I should be doing it all the time. But I don't think that's how most people think of this idea. They cherry pick their bandwidth in their mind to say, oh, this afternoon I've got that thing. That's when I'm going to like do my thing. That's when I'm going to be maximum me. But I'm doing it right now, baby. It doesn't mean that I'm winning, losing, or I'm mega. None of that matters to me. I'm just being it now. I believe it. I believe that I am maximum me right now. And therefore, all of my bandwidth is right now. And it doesn't mean that I should be to the left of the center or to the right of the center of my bandwidth, whatever that means to anyone's mind out there right now. It just means that I am very conscious, very aware of what I am doing right now. And I'm intentionally doing the right thing for me right now, for this moment with you and our intention. And so these things are not to be like employed or deployed at a certain fixed timeline somewhere in the future. It's now. That's the only time that it's used is now.
Yeah, I think it's so I think the answer to all this is reverence. And it because like this perfectionistic sterile way of living, when you have reverence to things, you're meeting it where it's at. Now life becomes less like you're trying to optimize it, and it becomes more of like your participation in it.
You're experiencing it.
So I think that when you meet it with that, in that reverence, there is an opportunity to see everything and anything, even yourself and your relationship with reverence. I think when that starts to evolve, you evolve, and I think there's no limitation to that.
Well, there isn't, honestly, except the ones that we put in our minds, which we always do. And then that becomes the conversation, doesn't it? We're talking about creating like contrast in order to understand something, the bandwidth of a moment. You've got to do the extremes in order to understand the middle. And therein also lies the truth of this moment. You have to understand the moment doesn't exist, but it's truly existent. And so you've got to see the contrasts of the entire conversation to some degree.
Yeah, I mean I subscribe to this Chi Master, and I've been learning from him for years,
Dude, I
and
love it.
he, I mean he probably wouldn't call himself enlightened, but he would, in my opinion, I would probably perceive him as somewhat enlightened. And one of his practices is going through the 6 verses, and they're very simple. And part of these 6 verses and what he has transcribed them from is different cultures in ancient China who have taken all of the wisdom cultures from ancient China and came up with these 6 verses.
Mm.
And at the last part of those 6 verses, you it's a very simple practice where you expand the spaciousness within yourself to the universe. And from that space, you have great reverence and respect for the universe. And I remember when I first did that practice, I had this ultimate bliss experience within myself. But it wasn't as if I had just discovered it. It was as if I was remembering it.
All right.
And in that remembrance, I had like just this tear come down my face. But that tear was not like joy. It wasn't like this blissful tear. It wasn't like a tear of grief. It was a tear as if there was a crystallized piece of me that had finally come home. And I think that's what reverence meant to me. And ever since then, I will never forget that moment. And as I move forward and evolve from that moment, that reverence begins to show me a deep respect for all things, which I think is essentially lacking with it as we're moving forward towards the evolution of a species that's moving in conjunction with artificial intelligence. What do you think?
I'm curious as to how many times you've forgotten that moment.
Well, that's the thing. Life hits and we forget,
Mhm.
but it's like rinse and repeat from that. And the goal is to integrate that as as a building block for your life.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think like and that those 6 verses are a practice. It's something it's designed to do every day. So I think that that's why we have personal practices, whether um, you acknowledge yourself each day through meditation, or you do journaling, or whatever it is. Right? These are things that keep us uh, in remembrance.
Isn't that interesting? Keep us in remembrance. I love that term. That is such a powerful term. Keep us in remembrance. What does that mean to you?
I mean, it's the kind of those 10 toes down.
Mm. Right, right.
Those 10 toes down really help in life because we get distracted, we get sidelined by our own psychology, we get sidelined by our conditions, we get sidelined by our programmings. And but those things they work for a limited time. But when you go underneath all that, I think that's where like our essence is it's just waiting in a dormant state because it's just thirsty for that connection. And when we reconnect things like your essence of who you are, that's where like sovereignty evolves. That's where qualities start to thrive because it doesn't thrive off of the masks we wear. Those are or the hats we have to wear when we go to work and or the stage of life. Does that make sense? I
It
don't know if
does.
that helps at
So,
all.
no, it really, to me, it does. But then I can see myself in it. I can see myself in your description. I can see myself standing rooted, clear eyed, looking forward into the void, not knowing what's next, but comfortable with it. But I don't think everyone else does feel that. And so, you know, the question to you is perhaps is it available for everyone? You know, is it something that is worth pursuing, clear-eyed and bushy-tailed, or are you supposed to just kind of do the daily and wait for it to appear? Is it homework or is it a revelation? What are your thoughts on those things?
I think it's a painful process to get there. There's that grief of realizing how much you've you've lied to yourself.
Hmm. Hmm. Noted. That's a valid point. Really, it is a big part of the conversation to some degree.
Because these things are tricky, right? Like we can talk about perfection and the need to want that, and our vanity is involved with it, our self-worth is involved with it, the sufferings involved with it, and it shows up in all these little small crevices of our lives without us even noticing it. So the trick is to notice what has been playing a role in your life, or how you've been playing your role in your life with these little small sneaky ways our ego has masked itself into becoming pretty, into becoming somewhat uh, like a false prophet in your life, telling stories and telling uh, these prophecies of how you're supposed to live.
Yeah, prophecies for
That's
your own mind that you are encouraged to be excited about, that you've self-created. And so, then is that the case of you're holding up your teacup with its cracks of ego in it, appreciating that those cracks of ego are now gold inlaid filled cracks, you're attracted to your flaws because they are the beautiful part of you, you can look at that teacup and see a clay cup, or you can see porcelain, or you can see gold. It's all in the eye of the beholder, as you said earlier. And so, is there a part of your life where you saw the beauty in your flaws, where your misplaced ego actually became a flaw, but then it was beautiful because you'd recognized the flaw? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, I would consider myself an artist, and so when you're talking about the eggshell concept with the tiger, I really was drawn to that because I struggled as an artist for a very long time. And that's why even Wabi Sabi is helpful to me because it helps me just have more value in how I do my art without trying to make every line just so perfectly straight or it has to be like this. I've done pretty big murals before and done like spray
Mm.
painting and things like that. And then I let go of the perfection around it to to a degree. There's still some of it involved when you're trying to create an art piece because you want an end product to look a certain way. But I think the using that same teaching I did with my daughter, I used it in my own artistry where it didn't have to be a straight line. I just trusted that this crooked line would have its own parallel effect to the other line that I'm creating. Let's say I'm trying to draw like a lightning bolt, right? And that other line, there's like a small little, I can see it. No one else can. This small little line that just has its own crooked nature, but the other line actually makes it and synchronizes it with it very well. And so I've noticed that there's like a trust relationship with what you're creating. And I think that is another key component or a key quality that is, I think, being misused or less understood in an effort to look at our own aesthetic or look at our own, um, you know, road to success, however you want to perceive that. Because we remember all the criticisms in our life, but we don't remember all of the times we've motivated ourselves. Why is that?
Yeah, dude, I wish I had an answer because that is the $10 question, of course. And I mean, there's no one harder than me on myself than me. I am my own biggest critic, and uh, maybe that comes along with imposter syndrome or whatever the case is. But I am pretty freaking hard on myself. That is for sure. I don't. It's not sometimes even healthy, how hard I am on myself. I don't give myself a lot of leeway or slack or a lot of grace to some degree. And I could not say that out loud and just keep that to myself and feel like everyone appreciates me because I have no struggles, but that's just not the reality of my life. I mean, like, I am freaking hard on myself, probably too hard. And that inner critic, that inner voice, has served me well at times, and sometimes it hasn't. And so, for me, the recalibration of that inner critic, we'll call it, um, has to be a pretty regular thing, but it's not something that I try to lock down at a 5 out of 10 and keep it there, like keep my heel on it, as it were, to keep it in place. Um, I know it's part of my life, and I know it's going to do its thing, no matter how hard I step on it. It'll squeak its way out and get its way back into my life. So I pay attention to it, but I allow it to exist rather than like constantly trying to clamp it down. Because over time, I've realized it has a rhythm, like life. It has a pattern, and I see the rhythm of it now because I've observed it long enough and let it do its thing without trying to constrain it too much. And so it's part of my identity. It's part of my, not character flaws, but it's part of Sean that I've had to learn to live with and not just accept, but like be cool with it to some degree. So, the by saying all of this, I'm not raising the idea of the inner critic or the inner voice is good or bad. What I am saying is that I believe it's a thing for all of us, and I'm just externalizing it so that people out there can think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I relate to that as well. And just recently, not too long ago, just I had a realization with myself. And when I speak on realization, it's just it's a it's a it's a thought or an emotion or both that I come into an agreement with that takes me back to remembering who I am.
That's a great that's you know what? I'm glad you expanded on that because it's important. It's great.
So I was in the shower out of all places, and for some reason, this thought came into my mind. If I asked myself what I would change at my deathbed, and the the answer was I would be less hard on myself. And I really was stricken by that, and it was so true. And so since then, uh, and then I really felt that, I'm like, man, I really was like, I am really hard on myself.
It resonated. Yeah.
And I think the blueprint is what I wanted to seek. Like, where did it come from myself? And what was its origin? Why did that occur? And I think it was really just because I wanted attention and love from my mom when I was younger. And so that's my original blueprint. So I am curious. And when we're children, we just gravitate towards these little things, and we're just so silly the
Hmm.
way we do that.
Hmm.
However, we extend that original blueprint, and other things start attaching to it that are unhealthy.
Fact.
And so I am curious, where you think your original blueprint came from. And as you're
It's
as
a
you're
great.
telling me this, I got to plug in my laptop. It's gonna die.
All right, do your thing. Do your thing. Well, it's a good question, and I've spent a little bit of time thinking about it, and I would suggest that we have some adjacency or parallel creation stories in respect to that. With my mom, and um, I, there's many things that can create our cognitive signature or create our life path or our cultural understanding of things. It could be many things, and I feel that it's probably 100 things all in a big pile and whoosh, lined up into that's who you are when you're 5. That's who you are when you're 12. That's who you are when you're 37, etc. And by that's who you are, I don't mean that's your fate or that's what you're locked into. None of this is carved in stone as to who you are at 97 years old. But all of these things add up over your life. And my mom, like yourself perhaps, is um a initial factor that started setting the stage to some degree as to my relationship with these kind of things. And so we show up in life as life with a life, but then life all around us impacts our life. And so none of this is like my way or the highway. And none of it is their way. It's a combined way that we're all still trying to understand. And so I take not satisfaction, but I take a certain sense of ease with the idea that it's going to sound crazy, man. But as I sit right here, right now, whatever, like, whatever. What happened yesterday and in my past and all those things, they're points in my life to consider, but they are now gone. And I'm me. And I have a future in front of me. And I have this time that I'm sharing with you. And my life, what we're supposed to be doing, I believe, is just be in it in a way that feels right to us, that won't disappoint us a second from now or a day from now, or that we won't say something that is regretful. Like, I don't want to say something that's regretful right now, but I may regret something that I say now, 10 minutes from now. And that's a lesson of life. I'm trying to do my best. I'm trying to be cool. I'm trying to live my best life, but I'll do something dumb in the next 10 seconds. And then that's life.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's we try and make an attempt to titrate our life off not making any mistakes, when mistakes are really where the growth comes from.
Mhm.
And I can speak from I guess my own personal experience with my job. And it's insane how I've created my life to have that job that I have, especially for the department that I work for, because our department is based a lot on perfectionism. I mean, if you came to our fire station, you should see are apparatus. They are just pristine, shiny, perfect. And I think that's an amazing way to look back on the timeline of how I've manifested where I'm at today. And so I think with us making that attempt to not make mistakes, now you've created this life of moderation.
Yes.
And that's why I really liked to pose those two um, behaviors, because it's very sneaky the way
It's so
it
sneaky.
shows up, and it is in itself an illusion. And I think when we realize sometimes when that shows up, because you can listen to this and just take the idea of moderation extremism and then live your life for a week, and you could just write down every single time that it shows up, and you'd be truly amazed on how you behave. And but the only thing is that's just an operating system. And I love Dr. Joe Dispenza. He's probably one of my favorite I guess revolutionary people out there right now, because he talks about how he takes the mysticism out of mystic
Mm,
concepts, and then applies like real neurology to it, which I love. And so he just talks about these things are just operating systems.
they
And
are.
all you have to do is replace it with a new operating system. But what happens is that old operating system, when it's being um, when you're suffocating it, it's looking for all these hormones, all these dopamine responses that get released by feeding it. So that's why there's a bit of a civil war that happens when you're looking to change your life. Now, he talks about the real biological responses we have when it's in suffocation, when you're saying, hey, I'm not going to do that behavior any longer. Now, you're going to see it a lot more because it's being neglected now. So you're going to see it happen more and more and more. But the more you just don't feed it, the more you start to see the real change happen in your life. So I think when we just see the mind, the biological mechanism as this quantum computer, and it's treated as such, that these programs have just been installed, then it's an opportunity to see like your change happen in your life, and see it grow in the way you want it to. You really can make that happen. Now, I think the question has been posed with psychedelics, how it becomes a cheat code for individuals who are seeking real change. And these are people who are in like rock bottom, right? And they use psychedelics as an opportunity to like, hey, what's happening here? And what I've understood is like some of these big medicines like ibogaine or iboga or even ayahuasca or even DMT, they are kind of like an iOS update to this quantum computer. And not only is it an iOS update, but it actually pulls apart the iPhone, goes into the source code and rewrites the source code for you, and then puts the iPhone back together and gives you another iOS update. And I think that is like become such a phenomenal tool. But what happens is people have now seen this as a capitalism, or uh, an opportunity to use this and bastardize it. And so I hope that doesn't happen, but it's just something like I kind of wanted to bring in an off topic.
Well, you're speaking my language because I just wrote kind of a book about that. But to your point, the idea of a systems based approach, or starting from an operating system basis, or even starting to think of life as a tiny little Lego block at a quantum level that we're just scaling up into. Well, now you're a human, and now you've got an operating system, and now we're having a conversation. There's lots of ways that we could talk about that. But what I do find interesting is in respect to Wabi Sabi, and you developing perhaps your perfect operating system live. Um, the the reality is that even if you're super focused and run a very tight life game, and very little deviation on what you create as your perfect path, life will show you otherwise. And so as we create, quote unquote, our perfect vision, Wabi Sabi gets involved. And so the thing that I've learned most about people is in these moments, what they do when they get wabi sabied, when they have their perfect vision, their perfect life, their perfect family, their perfect beachside house, or whatever the case is, their perfect existence, how they change when the crack occurs in the cup, when the fracture occurs in their relationship, when their spilt tea in their lap of life embarrasses them in front of their circle of friends. So we all have our position in life at this moment. And some people will see their position in life right now as perfect or as imperfect or as amazing or as the suck, whatever. Our interpretation of the moment is what drives our relationship with Wabi Sabi. If we feel that we have a gold porcelain perfect cup, we will keep sipping on that for the rest of our lives and feel that we have an amazing existence. But the moment that we start noticing the notches and the dings and the little fractures in our cup, that's the pattern interruptive life. And so that an imperfect cup, it's that liminal space, that brief split second of, that is not perfect. What? Am I okay with imperfect, or is that now my perfect imperfect? Every liminal moment that we notice, is a moment for us to accept it or for us to consider it more deeply.
Yeah, liminal spaces are really uncomfortable because I feel like that's where you feel the most confused. That's where you feel the most alone, the most isolated, and but that's where a lot of growth can evolve from. And I think that's where there's the master keys start to kind of fall into your lap in liminal
Hmm.
spaces because you're being presented with just a lot of I kind of see the liminal space as like a ghost town.
Me too.
So that's how I see it. And when that happens, what I've found the master key to be are our qualities and even qualities of the heart, like compassion
Even
and
more so, like predominantly heart driven. Yeah,
which I've seen to be the most challenging at the same time because they are the most pattern interrupters
they are.
when you're looking to kind of integrate a quality of the heart.
And they're the least accepted by you, by
Right.
society, right?
100%. And I know there was like a story about a Zen Buddhist and he was asked how he had attained everything and he said he pointed to his chest and it's like this Chinese word called the sin, Sihn, and he said this is the answer. You know, like above all the intellectual philosophical understandings of the Tao or around karma or whatever. That's really where the answer was. And I feel like it's just like it's a multiple choice answer because there's so much more to it than just the heart,
Yeah.
you know?
But is there though? I mean, because like there's a part of me, the academic in me, the curious mind in me, the I don't want the puzzle to end in me.
Yeah, for
The,
sure.
right? I don't want it to be as simple as that per se. My my existence wants more, though it needs nothing more than what we're just discussing right now. But is that a human nature thing, you think? Is it in everyone that irrespective of your relationship with this understanding of this moment, we'll say, once you see it for what it is, do you accept it for what it is, or do you just keep on piling on and doing what like really works for your head, you know?
I think
I want to
we're
keep
addicted.
going. I don't. It's If someone handed me the slice of apple pie that said the keys to the universe, all of the answers, whatever it was on the silver tray, I probably wouldn't take a bite. I don't know if I would want it that easy. I wouldn't want the answer, even if it was dangled in front of my nose, because then that's the game over, you know? Once I've got the answer, well, then what? Okay, I got the answer. Is that the game over because I got the answer? Now am I running contrary to the answer just to extend the game, you know?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think the addiction is to the puzzle, or the addiction is to the finding the answer to things, or even it's like still having that same concept of more, more, more. And it has a lot of false promises. And I think I always relate to this Sanskrit word called santosha, which is
Hmm,
contentment.
hmm,
And when we have just contentment for this moment or what we have, then we have a less capability to strive for more or strive to be in an addictive behavior, because we don't need that. There's less of an attachment to it, and because we created a relationship around feeling inner peace with what you already have or with what's been given to you. And I think I did want to end this conversation by asking you a question, because I've kind of rambled and siphoned through so many thoughts around this at an intellectual level and even at an emotional level. But I struggle around discipline, because discipline is still a requirement in some degree if you're looking to improve yourself physically, improve yourself in the capacity of how you show up. And then this is more so because in my career, we there's a requirement, physical requirement
um,
to be in shape. There's a physical
mm.
requirement to do what I do condition wise. And so I'm looking to find the middle ground with this, but also not beat myself up because I feel like I'm unworthy because I'm not meeting my goddamn standards.
That is a great question. So I just mentioned to you a bit ago that I put up a post with young Pathfinder 3 tips. And, one of them relates to this topic, and that is, in a sense, discipline and having a baseline standard or a standard for yourself that exists with no eyes on you. So, in a room by yourself, the standards of your mind, the standards of your life, the standards of your standards, what you stand for. That is not discipline. That is your standards. To maintain your standards, maybe you have to apply discipline, but you've got to have standards before you even consider the word discipline. And I think we can both agree on that. Now, discipline can be tricky, especially when you don't want to be disciplined because you're tired or you didn't eat enough or you didn't hydrate well or whatever, had a rough day, and all of the things that sort of erode discipline. So, I like to not replace discipline. Like I'm not saying take the word discipline, throw it in the garbage, or never use it again. I like to bolster up or work alongside of in adjacency with discipline the term curiosity. You have to be curious about yourself. You have to be curious about what you can do in the moment. And so you show up with your standards, check. You have discipline, obviously, check. But where it might fall apart for you as you get older, or if you've been doing something for a really, really long time, is you may have lost your initial sense of passionate curiosity about a thing. On day one, you were passionate and curious, but now you've gone quite a ways down that path and you've solved a lot of the puzzle of your career. You've answered a lot of things about yourself. So that curious and passion individual is probably to some degree now gone. And so every day, if you can apply curiosity instead of discipline, That's what I like to ask people to do. And it usually takes them further than just discipline.
Yeah, that does make sense, and it really does help. It's a good quality to use. That's why I always lean back towards the fool, because the
Mm.
fool kind of has that curiosity, or he does have it. That's one of his main driving factors is he doesn't need to have such an aim that makes him, start grueling at every single cliff he comes across or a dead end he comes across. He's like, "Oh, okay, I'm just going to turn the other way and see what takes me there."
But what
So,
does the fool need? You said what the fool doesn't need, but what does the fool need?
well, I think the fool, the way it kind of he evolves into the king archetype. It's usually what happens, and then the king evolves into like the usually for a woman it's called the crone, which is like
Oh,
this
yeah,
just
right. Yeah, yeah.
the a wisdom
Yeah,
filled
yeah.
individual just through experiences of life. I don't know what term that would be used for a man, but the king can grow very old and has more like a sovereign wisdom approach to things. I think it's not necessarily based on his logic alone. He's come to grips with his emotions where he feels comfortable with them, where he's not swooned by them. He
Mhm.
actually has used them in his life to actually learn how to relate to others. And I think that's really the key point is in relation to others, in relation to yourself. It's really the reverence that is necessary in order for you to abide and not become rigid by discipline, but using it as a tool rather than making it your identity.
So, fool to king to crone. And so I've got a little bit of a crone nose on me, by the way. And so one of the things about that sequence of events as I see it in my mind right now is, and you still duck, dodged, and dived as to what the fool needs rather than what the fool does. So the crone is the logical extension of perhaps the king, but one of the aspects of cronism or the crone, the usually it's shown as an older woman with a hook nose and sort of that side profile, and they kind of look a bit hard and they look a little bit weathered and a little bit beaten by life, and they have a certain air of, and maybe there's various crones, but when I was a young kid growing up in England, a crone was someone who had sort of been lived a hard enough life that they'd learned their lessons, but also simultaneously had a bit of a hard edge about them, had a little bit of a not disdain for the world, but had a little bit of a, we'll call it separation from the world, for lack of a better term. And so you've got the fool who's bumbling through the world, you've got the king who sees the world, and then you've got the crone who starts to separate from the world. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think the as one gets older, they tend to separate from the things that they looked back on their life with. And so I think I've never really found the crone to be wanting to separate, but more so to
Yeah.
just want to be isolated in
Yeah,
a way
that's a
to
correct term. Yeah.
yeah, because they feel that's a necessary part of their life. And as they come to an end, and I don't know that it's a strange concept. I think
Well, it
what the
was for
fool
me.
does
Let
need.
me throw this at you because I've got a question, a
Yeah.
follow-on question for you, by the way, on your podcast. So, I kind of went through a crone phase myself just before, and I'm not saying, yeah, well, I've definitely been a fool. I don't think I've ever been a king, but I think I have gone through a crone phase. And it was just before I hopped onto the interwebs. I was off the grid, man. I was doing my own thing. I was in my Miyamoto Musashi cave here in my little hobbit town of Rossland, not being bothered by anyone, thinking my thoughts, all the wisdoms, analyzing life, introspecting, off the grid. And I loved it. But then my friends came into my life again and they asked me to come and do this, what I'm doing with you right now, podcasting and writing and putting my crone like thoughts into the world to some degree. And so now what comes after crone? Because that's where I'm at right now. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think we oscillate between these archetypes,
Mm,
and I think that's like perhaps the totality of it all, or even integration. And I think that's where we see how valuable those parts can play a role on this great stage of life, and how they can show us some meaning of how that archetype plays its role. But I think they're all valuable. They all have held some sense of narrative
mhm.
within the playwright.
Dude, did I just go full circle and am I back to the fool again? Is that the snake eats its tail? I'm now a fool? Oh, man.
I think that what the fool needs is guidance.
Yeah,
He doesn't have
agreed.
a compass. But that
Well, I
I think
don't. Do
yeah.
you? I don't want a compass, by the way, quite frankly. I love the way I live my life right now to some degree as a fool, but I don't think of myself as a fool anymore than I was when I was a kid for sure. And perhaps I'm living the archetype of a fool right now, or a king or a crone or all three. Who knows? But I do love the way I'm living my life right now. And it's a sense of curiosity, a sense of ease, a sense of I have no concern with what's around the corner. And in fact, I'm kind of curious, so I will start heading that way. That's how I'm living my life right now. And I don't know what archetype that is. In my head, it's Aragorn or Strider from the Lord of the Rings. Or in my head, it's a Ronin from Japanese history. Or in my head, it's dot dot dot. It's my variations of the play right parts, if you will. And so I never think of myself as a crone. I think of myself as X, but that X works for me in this phase of my life. And I would argue that a lot of people, whether they're familiar with the Fool, the King, and the Crone, and all the other bit players, chances are most people don't even have one of those as a consideration in their life right now. They haven't identified what they align with right now. And so the very conversation of king, crone, and fool may feel really awkward and uncomfortable and almost unnerving to someone who's listening to this. Good. That means that it's something that you should not only consider today, but maybe identify what phase of your life you are in right now.
Yeah, totally. And going back to the sense of Wabi Sabi, and that road, I really do think is effective on any of those archetypes we had mentioned, or any archetype you want to feel akin to, because you'll never find that finish line. You'll never find that standard you're seeking. It's just an endless cycle of suffering. And I do
Yeah,
want to go back to
congratulations, by the way.
you'll never get that congratulations,
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
you'll never get
that,
it. And
that's true.
I do think one of the main components of that video we saw was Katsumoto in Last Samurai. And if anyone's ever seen that movie, there's a famous part of the movie where Katsumoto is walking in a Japanese garden, and he's looking at these cherry blossoms. And he said a man can walk throughout his life and never find a perfect blossom. And this is a spoiler alert, but at the end of the movie, he is dying, and he looks up at the sky, and it's during the fall, and the wind just takes off all of these cherry blossoms in the wind. And he looks up at all these cherry blossoms, and he looks at them and says, they're perfect. They are all perfect. And I think that was what was so beautiful, is like his epiphany was no matter what cherry blossom looked like, they were perfect in their own way.
Indeed.
So he spent his whole life trying to find this thing until he dies, and he finally realizes it. It's like it's the paradox of it all, right? And that's something I try to I hope not to be on my deathbed to find a realization such as that.
I'm torn though right now. I'm torn. I don't want to say. I don't even know which one I would want it to be, my man. It is
True.
because I think I've had these moments in my life where I've had that minor revelation, and I've locked in and thought, oh God, my goodness, now I see it for what it is. But then I'll have another one years later, and so on and so forth. And so when I'm on my deathbed, dang, like I want to feel like I did okay, and I want to feel like I don't have a bunch of dumb questions. But 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 I also think I think maybe it's not a bad thing if I'm laying on my deathbed with a few unanswered questions. And I'm not talking about lame questions. I'm and I'm and I'm maybe not even talking about questions about me. Maybe life as a whole, maybe my friends as a whole, maybe my family as a whole, maybe me as a whole. But I want to right now believe that there'll be a question that I can't see in my mind right now. I can't even begin to like consider that that's what I would think on my deathbed. And again, not a lame question, but something that as I'm fading away is like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I never thought of that. Bam. Then it's lights out. And then what? Where does that take me? What do I do with that last question that is revelationary? Where will I be? I don't know. But I don't want to like fade out to I kind of nailed that one. Dang, I got all the questions right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it all falls back to the mystery,
Yeah, for sure.
without
Yeah.
a doubt. So yeah, we're at that 2 hour mark right now. I feel really satisfied with this conversation. You know what I mean? I don't know how you feel.
I feel good, man. And you know why? It's because you're in it to win it. Isn't that a strange little sentence? You're in it to win it. Then that makes you like now you're competing in life and you're trying to win a conversation, and et cetera. I just see you as a guy who's in it to win it in life, in a sense of you are engaged. You are in this moment. You see life in a way that not a lot of people do. And that to me is winning in life is a dude who has a curious mind as you do, is open to open conversations as you are, and is not afraid to introspect in the real time as I watched you do. All of these things are indicators to me of a guy who's living not just a good life, but is living a life that others can emulate. And that, to some degree, is part of the Wabi Sabi conversation, I feel, is it is an individual journey, the wabi sabiness of life. But I can look over at someone who has a teacup in their hand, and as they appreciate their teacup in a way that is unique to them, I can gain from that by sharing that moment to some degree with them. Maybe not right next to them, maybe not all up in their grill, maybe not having direct conversation, but across a room, I can share a wabi sabi moment with someone if they are, in fact, in their own little moment. So I find you to be a guy who does that very well. And so, yeah, I appreciate sharing a bit of tea with you, my man.
Well, thank you, brother. I appreciate those kind words. And dude, Matt, it's crazy because how I present myself, it came through a lot of struggle. And I
Yeah, of
think that,
course.
a lot of struggle, dude, a lot of pain and a lot of suffering. And, I think and I needed those moments to just, because I was never listening or never wanted to listen, and was just so stubborn and wanted certain things to be a certain way. And I think that rigidity broke me. And I think now, once I got the point through pain, I was able to be more open and more kind. And it was
It
just crazy.
shows.
I was
It
just talking.
shows. It
I was just
does.
talking to this 100-year-old person at work the other day, and as a paramedic, you're paired up with another person, and where my partner asked the 102-year-old woman what her secret was, and she just yelled, "Be nice."
Mm,
It was a really amazing we all laughed in the room. It was amazing.
yeah, of course. Laughed at the truth of it.
Yeah, 100%.
Hmm.
So yeah,
Well,
be nice to
y-
yourself as well.
Just freaking be nice, man. And there that story means nothing to anyone if that story came from someone who wasn't in that moment. And moments are moments determine the power of a word. So you've been in enough of those moments to see it for what it was and feel it the way it should be. But not everyone is in your position. Not everyone has lived the life that you've lived and can see it a little more clearly, perhaps. Some people have had a life that doesn't allow them to see life as clearly as you do. And so, what would you say to them?
Trust.
Oh, that's great, dude.
Yeah.
What a great word.
Trust is a tough one
Nice one.
because it holds the key to the universe.
Nice.
It's easier said than done, but trust is
Agreed.
it's I think when I made an attempt to trust myself more, that's when other qualities and things in my life were blooming.
So then, what's the pro tip to round things out as to how a person applies more trust in themselves? Because I mean, you've gone through it. We've all gone, well, some of us have gone through it enough to understand that it is not a simple A to Z process and it's kind of unique to each person, but there is enough common overlap that whatever you say mm, carefully would be helpful to others. So,
Mm.
what did you what arrangement did you have to make with yourself to start believing in that trust?
Look to see where you don't trust first, and that'll
Mm,
show you where you need to trust and do
mm,
some work and build information around it. Like I think I had a really good friend who was doing some body work on me, really talented human being who understands the body and through his own injuries and illness. And as we were working together, he told me it doesn't matter what happened, it matters how you rectify it.
yeah, it's true.
So I think that allows a person to start trusting themselves more. And I think that's how we rectify things when we start trusting in the unknown, trusting in uncertainty, because in the end, there's no real certainty in life. There's no real safety in life. So if you can operate within the idea that you never truly are safe and feel comfortable in that, that's where trust starts to evolve.
And I think maybe one thing I'd like to throw out there for everyone on this tail end here is that, um, well, why bother? Why even start trusting yourself? Why even look for the things that you don't trust in order to identify what your relationship is with trust? Well, first, you will live a better life. But second, so will everyone around you. And so if you can't see it for yourself, if you can't do it for yourself, what you should take on right now is that maybe it ain't about you in this moment. Maybe it's about everyone that's sharing this journey with you. And so if you can like square it up and do it a little bit better for the people who are in your 360 right now, you will find that you're doing it better for yourself.
Yeah, and I think you brought up a good point where it comes to the power of choice that we had mentioned earlier.
Mm.
Because yeah, why even do that? What's the point?
Of it
And
all.
yeah, so I think that cynicism, when someone decides to sit in cynicism, and that creates a limitation and will push someone deeper into their own suffering, and it gets a person to hit rock bottom or hits that point of where they don't want to be suffering any longer, and that's where our choices stem from. And we will wait to that point, to the very end.
Yeah. I mean, I work through cynicism right through to nihilism, which I
Yeah.
think is the logical extension of cynicism. I don't know. I haven't really studied the two words in conjunction, but I do believe that is a fair statement. And so, to some degree, I existed in a form of nihilism at one point. I was just
Mhm.
freaking kind of over it, man. Not like over me and not over my family or whatever. I was just like, I was kind of done with the nonsense of the world. And as I said, I kind of moved into a crone phase or a Miyamoto Musashi phase of nihilism has maybe driven me to this. And I didn't think of it as nihilism. I just was doing me, but in a way that wasn't serving me or everyone else around me as well as it is now. And so when I look back at cronism Sean or cave Sean, it's not that I was being a jerk. It's not that I was being a clown or a loser or a goof or whatever. I was genuinely doing work that had to be done in a way that I felt I was being cool about it, but just wasn't producing maybe what the world needed at that moment. I was producing what I needed at that moment. When I began reintegrating myself into the world or interacting with the world in a way that I am now, I can see from now, looking back then, I was bordering on nihilism that had come out of cynicism. And so the cynic in me is something that I can pretty easily step into if I'm not careful, because the world that we live in makes cynicism to some degree quite easy.
Yeah, I agree. I just went through a whole process around nihilistic collapse and obsessive control,
Mhm.
and bouncing between those two worlds because they and at the core root of it was a lack of trust between both those things, which is
Mm,
crazy.
it
But
is.
I can talk about an hour about those just those two things because when I started to open those little tabs up in my web browser of my silly little brain,
Of your life.
it it really just catapulted me into how much I required those two things to make myself feel comfortable in my skin.
Right. But so here we are. Here we are, right? And I mean, like we could tear it all apart. We could compare the journeys and have a few comparative laughs, but bam, here we are. And so at the end of the day, or at the end of this very second, that's all that matters, honestly, is look at you and look at me. Look at what we're doing right now. Not so bad, right?
Very true. I am pressed on time here, Sean, but
Word.
and I think we will close a podcast episode and continue because it's fun. I enjoy it. And you'll open up a conversation or a topic, and I'm like, oh my god, I want to like continue this thread because it's just there's something in me that feels it to be necessary.
I
But
thirst for it. I do.
so thank you, Sean, for all that you do, your wise words, your impact on this planet. But thank you so much for your time, and I appreciate you.
Thank you for having me on, buddy. Love spending time with you.
All right, everyone. Thank you for listening. I love you guys. Take care.